China is not abandoning its ambitions for international expansion through the Belt and Road Initiative, which has long ceased to be a purely economic project. This year, Chinese companies have signed a record number of contracts for investment and construction in countries across Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. They are building everything, from railways and ports to energy systems and highways. The primary goal, it seems, is to expand their own presence and secure a greater economic role for regions that have long remained on the periphery of the global economy. Against this backdrop, the position of the United States looks entirely different. Trump is once again betting on raising tariffs and trade restrictions. Both China and Washington's allies are coming under sanctions or customs pressure. And while the U.S. builds barriers, China offers new opportunities to many countries, especially those with limited access to capital markets. The choice becomes obvious: cooperate quietly, or at least at exorbitant interest rates, but still attract money into their own economy. So, where are China's billions going? And how real is the threat from these investments? Beyond the cost of servicing the loans, in many cases, the project execution is handed over to Chinese contractors. In other words, they provide the expensive loans and then carry out the work themselves. Unlike Western institutions, they don't scrutinize the transparency of how these loans are allocated. Therefore, the elites of underdeveloped countries often accept loans from China because, frankly, the funds can be easily embezzled. And of course, the Chinese set the conditions. The components, goods, and resources used to build the infrastructure must come from China as much as possible. The same applies to the labor force. A significant portion of the funds formerly intended for the host country's infrastructure development actually flows back to China in the form of payments to its construction and engineering companies. Despite this, for many countries in the global south where infrastructure is neglected or underdeveloped and access to capital is limited, participating in such projects with China is often seen as one of the few viable options for launching large-scale initiatives. In the first half of 2025, China sharply increased its investment in countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. In this short period, the value of new contracts reached $124 billion, which is more than for the entire year of 2024. This includes 176 deals, a large portion of which are valued at over $10 billion each. The author of the study, Christophe Netapil-Wang, emphasizes that in 2025, China reached a completely new level of engagement in global development, with figures continuously rising post-COVID. This new wave of investment covers not only traditional sectors like transport or energy. China is actively investing in digital infrastructure, green projects, and the development of logistics hubs, that is, in segments that will be critically important in the coming decades. When we look at these large-scale processes of global investment, it becomes clear: real assets, land, energy, logistics, are once again taking center stage. This isn't just a Chinese trend, it's a global shift in focus from virtual capital to tangible value. The main driver for the program's expansion is that China is currently facing an economic slowdown at home, coupled with a new wave of trade pressure from the United States. Following Trump's return to power, tariff policies have tightened again, making it harder for Chinese companies to operate in Western markets. In response, China has begun to expand outward even more aggressively, seeking alternative markets, building new supply chains, and reducing its dependence on the US and Europe. In this context, the countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative have become even more crucial for Beijing. At the same time, for developing nations, it's a chance to deepen economic ties with the world's second-largest economy. The Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, aimed to involve over 150 countries, predominantly developing ones. The total value of contracts and investments within the program has exceeded $1.3 trillion. Of this sum, approximately $775 billion is for construction contracts, and another $533 billion is for non-financial investments. However, the investment focus in 2025 has shifted slightly. The energy sector is now the priority. The largest funds went to Africa, $39 billion, and Central Asia, $25 billion. Both regions have vast energy resources but often lack the financing or technical capabilities. China is actively exploiting this, entering with its technologies. Particular attention is given to the oil and gas sector. In just 6 months, China signed contracts and made investments worth about $44 billion, already more than for all of 2024. One of the most striking examples is a project in Nigeria, where China is investing $20 billion to modernize refineries. In Central Asia, Kazakhstan has captured Beijing's greatest attention, receiving $23 billion in investments and becoming the absolute leader among all Chinese program participants in the first half of the year. Kazakhstan boasts a strategic geographic position between China, Moscow, and Europe, plus large deposits of oil, gas, and uranium. Latin America, in contrast, has seen its cooperation with China fall to a 10-year low, likely because Beijing is focusing on regions where the economic benefits of investment are currently easier to predict. China has not forgotten the green economy either. It has invested a record $10 billion in renewable energy projects. However, this doesn't stop it from returning to the good old resource sectors. In the first 6 months alone, the Chinese directed nearly $25 billion into the coal, metallurgical, and mining industries. The overall level of investment is also growing. According to the Rhodium Group, in the first quarter of 2025 alone, Chinese companies announced direct investments of nearly $16 billion, 10% more than in the same period of 2024. The most notable investment destination is Southeast Asia. China is increasingly relocating its production there, which could help it evade American sanctions in the future. In recent years, China has been changing its tactics within the Belt and Road Initiative. Previously, the main instrument was state or semi-state loans, often issued directly to the governments of partner countries. However, not all borrowers were able to repay their debts. One of the most notorious examples is the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which the country ultimately leased to a Chinese company for nearly a century. Now China is betting on direct foreign investment. As Rebecca Ray from Boston University's Global Development Policy Center explains, this also reduces the likelihood of new debt crises in developing countries. The IMF shows that in the 5 years from 2018 to 2023, the net volume of capital that China invested abroad grew by more than 50%. For comparison, the US increased its investments by only 21%. China's trade strategy has also changed. It has become more difficult for American and Asian countries to sell their products due to new tariffs, quotas, and licensing fees. For instance, the US announced 50% tariffs on Brazil, which could theoretically push the country closer to China. Against this backdrop, China is doing the opposite. It is opening up, lowering tariffs for African exporters, and stimulating trade. The Belt and Road Initiative is transforming into a platform through which China is weaving the global economy in such a way as to place itself at its very center. In conclusion, China is gaining ever-increasing control over key industries, which directly creates security risks for the global economy. So that's the story, dear friends.